If something scares you, good, look into that. Self-development always comes from self-awareness.
Welcome to Talking Shop, the Communities Inc. podcast. Episode 9. Is feminism still relevant?
Hi everyone, my name's Shamsha Chauhan, I'm from Communities Inc., joined by Erin today. Hi Erin.
Hello.
Right, so just to start off with, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Of course I can. I work for Nottinghamshire Women's Aid. We are a medium-sized charity that is based in North Nottinghamshire. We offer free specialist domestic abuse support to children, young people, teenagers and women in that area. My whole career has been in the violence against women and girls sector, and that's because it's my passion, it's where I believe my skill set thrives, it's where I thrive personally as a woman, so that's a little bit about me.
Great. So you're definitely the right person to be asking around feminism. So my first question, I guess, is there a consensual view as to what feminism is and what it's about?
No, and that's what I love about it. I think sometimes when we push and we push and we push for consensus, we lose the richness and the texture of narrative, experience, thought. And I think sometimes that's where we can go wrong a bit with feminism, because we want there to be the one book, you know, the one feminist author or the best feminist. And I, in my life, my career, have striven to be the best feminist in the room. I failed so many times at that. And I've actually really enjoyed failing. And I really celebrate the richness in the difference. So for me, consensus is a limitation. I think it's about celebration of variety. And that's what I really love about feminism. There isn't one right way and there isn't one wrong way. It's much richer than that.
Yeah. So in a way what you're saying is that if there was a consensus, it actually reduces the diversity of thought, practice and application of feminist thought and practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how I feel. So, for example, like I did a master's in women's violence and justice at York University, and I loved it. I was super privileged to be there. And what I found I was doing unconsciously was that there was guest lecturers coming in, feminist lecturers. And what I was doing week on week, and this isn't fair, but I was going like, oh, are they my favourite feminist? And then the next feminist would come and I'd be like, oh, actually, I like that feminist more. And it was, in my head, it was turning into a bit of a competition of, as I said, the best feminist, the favourite feminist. And actually what I was doing was pitting women up against each other in regards to feminism, which is the most ironic thing when you think about it. But I think sometimes that's what we do in our communities, is that we want that one person, as I said, that one book, the one right author. When actually, why can't a lot of people be right? Why can't we look at that together? And I think that's what I really like about feminism. And what I will say is that I love talking about feminism and I identify as a feminist. But at no point do I think I'm the ultimate feminist, because I think that's a really unreal, unhelpful construction for everybody.
Yeah. So I can hear that you're clearly very passionate about this. Yeah. And obviously feminism has a long history, and depending on who we talk to, that might be, going back centuries as opposed to just, a couple of decades. But thinking about the present day, what do you think are the challenges that feminist thought and practice currently face?
I think for me, where we're at in terms of feminism is that there is a high risk / reward construct that happens a lot in our society. So basically, being cancelled is a massive high risk, high reward construct. And again, I think there's almost this competition. So it's about, if somebody says they're a feminist, people are very quick to look at them and say, well, actually, they might be a feminist, but they're an awful person in another way. So it's people are quite quick to drag somebody down. But I do think feminism is a lot more alive in our discourse, in our natural public discourse. I love that feminist books are much more out in the open, as it were. It's a lot cooler to be feminist, which is helpful. But again, there comes that construct of people sometimes wanting to challenge you. But I'm not afraid of a challenge, and I'm not afraid of conflict in any way. I see it as it can be helpful and healthy.
Yeah, and some of those challenges come from outside. Andrew Tate comes to mind. What's your views on what sort of a challenge or threat does he pose to feminism?
I think he's a very interesting construct. And I think it's about looking at what people get from him. As an instinct, I don't like his construct. But what I do when I'm fearful or I'm anxious about something is that I want to learn more, and that's because I'm in a privileged position that I can do that. It's technically safe for me to do that. So I have a lot of curiosity about that. What about his narrative, his behaviour, etc. do people want to access? And what does that tell us about the culture and environments that we live in? I think in terms of threat, I always think, for me, threat's a very literal construct. I think there is ways that certain constructs can challenge other things that I hold dear, such as feminism. But I believe in feminism to a degree that there is that level of flexibility and robustness to it and rigour. And I'm going to say this frankly, it's going to take more than one man to quell feminism. And that's why I don't like to put a lot of energy or to add any more fuss to a individual, because I feel almost like we go down that Voldemort boogeyman construct, you know, and that actually adds to his power, whereas I see him as an individual who has a platform in which he voices his opinion.
Yeah. And, obviously over the last decade or so in particular, society has become more aware of the violence against women and girls that girls and women have always been aware of, and obviously that presents additional challenges in terms of how women and young girls respond to their experiences. What do you think are some of the opportunities around feminist thought and how that could be implemented to actually address some of these issues that we're all now becoming much, much more aware of, whether that's within our education system, whether that's sexual harassment and discrimination within the workplace, or within our communities? What are the opportunities that are there?
Yeah. I think for me, something that's really powerful is about reflection. So sometimes we can run away and think about what an attitude is. So what's really strong in terms of feminism and the violence against women and girls movement is the Duluth model, where the belief is that behaviour is due to power, the want or to maintain power and control. And then if you have those two dynamics and you understand that that's what a person wants, that person feels like they need, and sometimes more importantly, they think they deserve due to where they position themselves in their own society, then we start to look at choice. And choice, I think, is a very positive opportunity. So in what we do is that when we start talking about choice, as in regards to all the actors in our world, what we can start to do is think about our behaviours, our choices. What is our perception? What is our behaviours in regards to it? And that's where the bystander intervention element comes in, which I think is really, really powerful. Because sometimes when people talk about their reasoning for their behaviours, they never talk about choice. They talk about, well, that's what I was taught. And, it is about providing that freedom of choice, which sometimes can feel quite scary for people. So I think for me, that feminist construct that of power and control, when we come from that strong, solid base, and that there is an element of excuses that comes around for violence against women and girls, then we can have a much more powerful dynamic, and it's a lot easier for people to feel that they can intervene and act.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that you're almost talking about allyship in terms of support, the mutual support between women. What role do you think allyship actually plays within feminism?
I think allyship is so important, but it doesn't mean, again, going back to the consensus, it doesn't mean you have to be the same person, if that makes sense, or allyship has to be the same. It's about that beauty of difference. I think for me, in terms of allyship, you have to have an element of curiosity, because if you don't, then it can feel quite surface level, if that makes sense. If we can talk about experiences and have that positive curiosity, then allyship, I think, is glorious, and feminism can be glorious as well. What do you think?
To me, I mean, allyship comes from a sense of empathy, but also a connection. You know, we don't have to be able to feel what that other person is feeling, but we can sort of imagine what it's like. We can relate to that person that's experiencing that, which actually brings me on to another question, actually. So in terms of, we've, over the last couple of years, been working on Stand By Her, a programme that encourages men to be allies to women. What role do you think men have in being that ally to women and supporting those feminist practices?
I think they have every role in regards to allyship. As I said, I've been swimming in the water of violence against women and girls for a long time now. You know, I know these seas really well. But it's been really good, and I think really positive for me to reflect and see that not everybody has swam in the water. Not everybody knows where the water is. I don't know if this is a good analogy or not. But, you know, it's about looking at, well, actually, you know, is it that people want to be part of it? And what I found is that people, you know, in the majority, men do want to be part of it. And men can be part of it and should be part of it. And that's what I find really, really exciting, to be honest. You know, I feel like feminism is about women walking together forwards, but supporting men to be part of that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, so feminism isn't just about women, it's about everybody really. It's everybody has a role to play. When we first started talking about Stand By Her all those years ago, you know, there was obviously a very strong acknowledgement that in terms of violence against women and girls, the majority of the perpetrators were men. Mm-hmm. So in essence, men were a big part of that problem. But we also recognised that actually men were also the solution. And that it was only stopping those behaviours or stopping those escalation of those harmful attitudes and behaviours that was actually going to really address violence against women and girls in a sustainable way. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, you're sort of bringing me back round a full circle in the sense that feminism isn't just for women, is it?
No. And I think that's what's beautiful about it. It's, you know, it isn't for the constructs of, you know, certain people, as I said, or, you know, I used to think when I was younger, I used to listen to Women's Hour when I was young. I had no idea what was going on, literally no idea. But I used to tell people I listened to Women's Hour because I thought that was really cool. But it felt like a selective committee, as I said before, you know, going back to my favourite feminist construct, when actually I think the power in feminism is the power of all. I don't think it should be selective. But I do appreciate the intersectionality element of it. But I think, yeah, the competition between women can stop, and that's where feminism can come in to celebrate everyone, not just the few.
Yeah, which again sort of brings me back round to the role of allies, which is why they're so important. So, absolutely. You know, what would a typical ally, what would they be doing to support feminism, to support women? what would be some of those attitudes and behaviours? What would they look like?
Self-development always comes from self-awareness. So it's really good to take a step back and look at what the culture you give yourself and what that looks like. So for example, I look at my Instagram and see what that looks like. What does it show me? What does it not show me? And then I start to extend the what it doesn't show me. And that's what we found a lot when we talk to men and support men through the Stand By Her project, is that they start to, they might follow a couple more organisations maybe on Instagram to kind of start to open their scope of everyday knowledge construction. So I think that's what's really important about being an ally. But being an ally is about supporting yourself and then supporting others as well. So I think that's just really important to keep a mindful and have some grace with yourself as well. Again, about anti-perfectionism. Good enough is better than nothing at all in terms of allyship, isn't it? And I think that's what's really important. And if something scares you, good, look into that. What about that is triggering again for you, or there's things you're not going to like in life. Great, but again, how does that affect me? How does that affect my culture? How does that affect my community? Do I have to understand everything? Nope. Am I going to understand everything? Nope. So it's about giving yourself that grace and space.
It's about pushing through some of those difficult conversations as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what I love about, as I said, about difficult conversations. Sometimes what we find, especially with feminism, is that people think that a conversation with a feminist is like an argument, right? They think straight away it's going to be this argument and you're going to have to get out boulders and you're going to be throwing boulders at each other and, it's going to be awful. When actually, a lot of times, healthy conversation, curious conversation, which comes from that curious point of view, is so much more positive than not having that conversation at all and asking those questions and being positively curious. I think that fear hates conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah, so. I always think, if you can treat people with dignity and respect, then actually you can talk about anything.
Yeah.
People will forgive you for making a mistake, or, as long as we're respectful and we're treating people with respect and dignity, there's nothing really that we can't address. But that fear holds us back sometimes, and that's why we need those allies to be there sort of behind us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all deserve people to be behind us, next to us, in front of us. I think role modelling is really important as well. And I do think, in regards to that, I think with fear, the less we talk about what's happening or what we feel is happening, it allows those critical thoughts or hypercritical thoughts to excel, if that makes sense. So, I think, but you also have to have grace within yourself. So, we are constructed, we are full of judgments. I have loads of judgments, and that's okay. What I see quite a lot with things that, in terms of imagery and social media, so like Insta stories and stuff, the person's so full of rage and they absolutely are so rageful, and you can tell that by how they're talking, their body language, how they're saying it. And I think to myself, I don't even hear what they're saying because I'm thinking, why are they so angry?
Yeah.
Like, where does that anger come from? And there's a difference between anger and fear and passion, isn't there? So I always find that really interesting about where is that person coming from? And we see that as facilitators, don't we? Sometimes the feedback we get is a fear response, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's you've hit a trigger that I didn't know that I had. But as adults, we need to be mindful of that, but we have to give ourselves grace and space before we give it to anyone else.
Absolutely. And how much would you say, there may be some people listening, maybe some women listening thinking, they're not sure whether they're a feminist or not. What sort of encapsulates the behaviour and attitudes of somebody that identifies as a feminist. Because I know I used to do community development work, but I never labelled it in that way. And then when I started getting involved in community development networks, I thought, I've been doing this for the last 10 years. Okay. So just to sort of break that down a little bit, what would typical sort of feminist thinking and attitudes and beliefs be that might mean that, you know, some of our listeners think, well, actually, I've never seen myself as a feminist, but I do actually embrace some of those core principles.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it's about appreciating female experience. So, for example, for me in Nottinghamshire Women's Aid, one of our main structures is about listening, believing and learning from experience, which is a lot harder than it sounds. And I think that's a really positive construction, is about being aware of female experience and learning from it and being curious about the constructs. And I think that's what feminism is about. And it's about acknowledging the space and the development within our society for women and girls. And I think it's not about performance. That's the beauty about feminism. It can look all different ways. It's almost like a garden with lots of different flowers, you know. All of them are doing their own work, and they can look and be different, but it's about that collective thought. And what I think is really beautiful and gorgeous is that in the violence against women and girls sector, I do see a lot of women supporting women literally. So, for example, when I go to the police station, there's a lot of women who are, you know, at the front counter wanting to talk to a police officer, and they can be with, you know, like a female relative. And, you know, you see that over and over again in different spaces. And I think it's really important. But I think also what's really important about feminism is about making the self-care not selfish as well. Because I think as a woman that I was taught when I was younger to care for others in lots of different ways, when actually feminism is about reclaiming your value, yourself, and that is through self-care, not being selfish. That's about you celebrating the space you hold rather than apologising for it.
Yeah. So Erin, just thinking about some of those challenges again, and we mentioned Andrew Tate earlier, we also do see certain perspectives from media, from certain sections of the media, where there's almost like a backlash against feminism. Is that something that we need to be concerned about, or is it just some people having some derogatory and negative attitudes towards women?
I think for me, backlash is always expected when a boundary is put up. Backlash, again, is the extension of curiosity, and I'm always very interested about motivation and whose motivation it is. So, you know, for example, with social media, the constructs about algorithms, who creates the algorithms, who does it benefit, etc. I think now it's the quickness, as I said, the lack of critical review that can and does happen, and how that is fed by social media. So the more alternative, critical your views are, maybe the more people watch it. And then that can feel like a reward system, which I think is very interesting. And in terms of validation, I think I appreciate and understand that people want to feel that they belong and that they're listened to. I 100% get that. I get that as a person. So for me, a backlash, as I said, is always expected. For me, it's like waves on a cliff, you know? And I think it's about appreciating that and understanding that, but also supporting people to have critical thought on everything, though, including feminism. So looking, for example, on trad wives and things like that, you know, we can look at that and go, right, how important is that to me, for example? What feelings does it evoke and why? And unpacking that for me and the community that I work in, you know. Again, my construct of threat might be very different to everyone else's, which I appreciate. For me, threat is probably really basic, where it's basically like a tiger, like an actual real physical threat. Or I think, as I said about concepts, that the concepts I believe in and trust, they have that rigour. So again, those waves of backlash and individuals, I understand it. And I'll be honest, if you believe in something, I think, freedom of speech is still really important, but that has to be accompanied with critical thought and review, which I think, because of the kind of time lapse of the communication, is sometimes not found. Yeah. So we get reactive, rather than conversation, reflection, development.
Yeah. So, coping with some of that backlash is almost sort of, and addressing it is almost baked in, as it were, to feminism. It's expected, it's, we know it's coming because of the nature of feminism and the challenges it presents to other people.
Yeah, and especially with the developments and the rising of it, it's known that people will react, and people will react positively, negatively, and I think with the way social media is, people are reacting, they are. I don't think there's a lot of pre-thought to some of these constructs, and I'm not saying that's a negative thing, but a lot of it feels like a very, as I said, reactive upon reactive upon reactive. And what I think is really positive about humans and society is that we will learn from this. When I look back 5 years and I think, what did I say 5 years ago? It would be very different to what I would say now, in terms of terminology that we use, my experience, my thought. So we all come from we all have to come from somewhere.
So these counter narratives, do you think is there a reflection of wider society there, or are they just sort of blips and aberrations that need addressing and dealing with as and when they come up? Is there something more wider underlying that you think is more embedded within society?
I think misogyny is embedded into our society due to our patriarchy and capitalism. I think it's well baked in. I actually think it's the oven in which we bake our products in. Again, I don't know if that's a good analogy or not. I think it's there, and if we ignore that, I think what we've learned about, especially in terms of recent politics, especially in America, is that fear is a really good fuel to get people on board, and they don't know what vehicle they're on board, and they don't know where they're going, but as long as they're on a vehicle and they see other people getting on that vehicle, I think, fear is a very strong component, and threat, as I said, different people see things in different ways. So yes, I think it's about just acknowledging that's the mechanisms in which we work in, and yes, of course we want to deconstruct them, but they're not deconstructed. I've got a couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm very mindful of is that I'm a white woman, and I wanted to talk about our experiences as you're an Indian woman. So let's start from there.
Okay, yeah, I have thought about it. I think that intersectionality can sometimes blur the boundaries a bit. I do remember going to, a university event around International Women's Day, when I was working in Staffordshire a while back, and I remember I couldn't really relate to anything that was being said, and it was mainly white women that were there, and I remember sort of walking away from that event thinking, feminism is not for me. I guess that's because, as an Indian woman, in terms of my experiences around racism, I've had more negative experiences around my race and ethnicity than I have about me being a woman. And And that's led me to thoughts around that, you know, I would be more likely to identify and connect with different ethnic minorities, with black people, than I would automatically being able to connect with a woman. Obviously, there's lots of sort of variations around that, but I think the bottom line is, you know, most of my negative experiences, I think, have been around my ethnicity and not about me being a woman, which I think has affected sort of how I see feminism and how I relate to it or see myself even as part of that movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And because of that, does that change how feminism is talked about, if that makes sense? So if I give you an example from my experience, as I said, you know, I'm a white woman, and feminism to me was brought up when I was pretty young. As you said, you know, every feminist door was open to me because I'm white. Also helps that I'm middle class, super helps. So I was just, if I'm being honest, I was a fish in a shoal, you know? So I didn't walk into any room and think, I don't belong here. I saw everybody who I knew, and that was part of it. So, you know, in regards to how you were feeling in terms of feminism, how was it brought up in terms of like your life, if that makes sense?
I think there were a lot of gender stereotypes, lots of assumptions that I would, you know, in terms of what education I would do, in terms of what my marital status would be at a specific age, and when I'd have children and when I'd have my own family. And it took a while for me to actually realise that was exactly what it was. It was an expectation, and that I didn't have to live up to that. And I think I was coming to our late 20s, coming into my 30s when I realised that. And it was almost a bit of a revelation that, okay, although there are all of these expectations, I don't have to do that. And that was quite liberating, actually. It was sort of quite, okay, you know, I don't have to live up to that stereotype. My family were, you know, supportive in other ways, which meant, you know, I wasn't going to be coerced in that sense. And yeah, it sort of gave me quite a lot of freedom, but there wasn't that many positive role models as I was growing up in terms of women of colour. What I have noticed is, you know, I find myself looking into, there's a lot more black feminist writers now. I find myself sort of digging into articles, bought some books recently, and I can really relate to what they're saying. And actually what they're saying is what you started off with, that there's no one way of feminism. You know, there's as many levels, there's as many types of feminism as there are women. And I think that's a really, you know, inclusive way of actually looking at the whole diversity that make up women, you know, regardless of our ethnicity, our sexual orientations, our ages, our social status, or any other factor. So I think I'm beginning to feel more included. I feel more part of it, because those voices of black women now are starting to be heard. And yeah, and your sort of, you know, your perspective has sort of echoed that and embraced that, and I find that encouraging.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when we think about feminism and the construct of herstory, I know that when I looked at herstory, a lot of it is, a lot of the literature is about white women, you know, and then there has been this very well-formed construct of actually, you know, there was white women there, sure, but there was also a lot of other communities of women who also were part of the experience or, you know, development. And, you know, I'm not sure if this is the right word, but herstory was whitewashed in a lot of ways, and middle class washed. I'm not sure the right way to put that. Put in the dry cleaner, maybe. And I think that's really sad, but I think that's about critical reflection. You know, so I'll be honest, a suffragette to me was a white middle class woman near the horses, near the races, for a long time. And I think it's about informing yourself about, as you said, about herstory being rich in you know, all different communities as well. and different, you know, women, all women being there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Even if you're not read kind of in the mainstream inclusion of herstory. What do you think about the future? I know you're talking about kind of there's more books out there and more accessibility, etc. Where do you think it could go or should go?
I think it's about us making those connections for those that are going to come after us. You know, I look back now and I'm remembering, you know, aunts that I had in India, in rural areas, that left their husbands when, you know, you just didn't do that. You know, they left one aunt in particular left her husband, my uncle, with a young child. And now I'm thinking about some of those stories in my own family and thinking, wow, you know, that must have taken a lot of strength, that must have taken a lot of courage. She must have been really resilient and actually, you know, encapsulate maybe quite a lot of the qualities that we would traditionally see as, you know, belonging to women that identify as feminists. So I'm sort of like sort of calibrating and rethinking my history. And as I integrate that, then what I can do is I can pass that on to my niece. And, you know, when we're talking about feminism, that we're not just talking about the suffragettes and horses, that we're actually talking about our own family. I'd like to think, you know, I'm one of the unique members of my family that isn't married and hasn't got any children. I'm the youngest of my particular generation out of all of our cousins. I'm already an outlier in that sense. And I'd like to think that, you know, maybe in the future my niece will look back and say, yeah, you know, at a time when everyone was getting married and there was always, my aunt did what was right for her, you know. So I think we can be those examples, but we also need to tap into and remind ourselves of the histories that we do have where, you know, women have strived and, you know, gone through hardship and come out the other side and thrived, you know, as a response to that. So I think it's about making those connections for the future generations so that they don't have to do this work and think, is feminism for me? That it's almost built in to them growing up and recognising actually they are part of it. And as we were saying earlier, actually everybody's part of that story around feminism. Yeah. No, I've really enjoyed this conversation. You've actually helped me because sometimes I've not really felt included within that sort of feminist movement, as it were. I've always felt that feminism is something that other women do. But actually hearing you talk about it and how you talk about it is actually making me think, no, you know, I am part of it. You know, I might not have identified in that way, but what you're saying, what we're talking about, Stand By Her, you know, I would now start sort of thinking is a feminist initiative.
100%.
You know, because it's not only about empowering women and keeping women safe, but it's also about engaging men in that work as well.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really important about feminism. It can be academic, you know, there's many an academic book about feminism. There's nothing wrong with a feminist academic, but it's about whether you opt in, it's not whether they choose you. You know, you choose how you feel, how you identify, and how you conceptualise your experience. It's not about other people telling you you're a feminist or not, or you've read this certain book so you're a good feminist, or, you know, you haven't read this book so you're a bad feminist. It's about reclaiming your space.
So feminism is about our lived experiences rather than what we read or what we learn or what we hear about.
What we dress, you know, how we dress, how we talk, what words we use. You know, at that Masters, I used to wear what I thought was feminist makeup at the time, which was red lipstick every single time I went in to look at listen to my feminist academics. And that felt like a feminist uniform. And one day I was like, what am I actually doing? You know, it is about reclaiming your space. If you want to wear red lipstick, fab, but it doesn't mean you're a feminist if you don't, or vice versa. So it's about celebrating who you are.
That's great. And we're all unique individuals, aren't we?
Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, Erin. I'm sure we'll have many more conversations going forward. But thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and experiences.
Not a problem. Thanks very much for having me.